さて、それではお時間となりましたので、これからのブロックチェーンガバナンス G20 声明を踏まえた次なるグローバル協力をテーマにパネルディスカッションを行ってまいります。まずはじめにパネリストの皆様ご紹介させていただきます。まずは金融庁より総合政策局総務課国際室国際デジタル戦略調整官兼企画調整官高梨裕太です。よろしくお願いします。続きまして、ストロングブロック最高ガバナンス責任者トーマス・コックス様です。オンラインでご参加いただきます。そしてメーカーファンデーショングローバルリーガルカウンセルヤチェック・チャルネッキ様のご登壇を予定しておりましたが、本日ご都合によりご欠席となっております。そして最後にモデレーターを務めていただきますのは、慶應義塾大学大学院政策メディア研究科特任教授鈴木茂也様です。鈴木様、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。さて、ではここからは鈴木様にお願いしたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Hi, good morning. So this session is on a multi-stakeholder governance for decentralized finance. So unfortunately, in this venue, there are no very small amount of attending. Thank you very much for attending in this situation. But usually, I want to ask audience that whether you know about the governance or not. But since the number is small, let me skip. And so the governance word itself says that it is going to govern something. And of course, if we say governance, then we are talking about what there are something we need to govern. And as the title said, we're talking about decentralized governance, decentralized finance, governance of the decentralized finance, and also in a multi-stakeholder style. So it is maybe difficult to understand. The first thing is, of course, what the governance of decentralized finance is. And the second thing is what is a multi-stakeholder governance is. So the idea of the multi-stakeholder governance came and implemented in with the evolution of the internet. And the internet nowadays can not be as we see without the multi-stakeholder governance style of the community. So we want to learn from the multi-stakeholder governance of the internet. And we want to apply some of the knowledge or wisdom of the multi-stakeholder governance to decentralized finance area. That is the idea of what we are going to talk about. So we have, unfortunately, one of the panelists is not available today, but we fortunately have a very good two panelists here. So let me introduce two panelists. First panelist is Yuta Takanashi from JFSA. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Yuta Takanashi. I'm from Japan FSA, the financial regulator in Japan. And I'm currently working on the financial sector issues at the G7 and G20, and also the various international initiatives focusing on financial inclusion, including like fintech, blockchain, crypto assets, and stablecoin, as well as some of the decentralized finance issues. So I'm very happy to join this panel, and also I'm looking forward to discussing this important topic. Thank you.
Okay. Before I'm going to ask Thomas on his introduction himself and more information on his slides, let me introduce myself. I'm Shigeya Suzuki of Keio University. I'm a project professor and also the member of the KO Blockchain Lab. And I had just finished the research on how we can apply the internet-style multi-stakeholder governance for the decentralized finance with the help of JFSA. So we are going. I'm touched about how we did in a later part of this presentation. Okay, Thomas-san, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, konnichiwa. I hope you hear me well. My name is Thomas Cox. I'm the Chief Governance Officer for Strong Block. I've been doing blockchain governance for 3 years, which, as you know, in the blockchain world is a very long time indeed. And prior to that, I worked for Oracle Corporation in databases. I worked for IBM Global Services in consulting and enterprise projects. So I've got some familiarity with the broader space that we're working in when we come to the world with a blockchain or a distributed ledger technology. However, one thing I found over the course of the first year or so, when I was struggling to understand this issue of governance with blockchains, governance with distributed ledgers, I assumed that everybody else understood it, and I was the stupid one. And I was just not finding the right things to read, bring me up to speed with everybody else. And I've come to realize that no, everybody's equally lost, is struggling. And so I put together a presentation that explains the most fundamental things I've found that we can use as a base, a building block to build upward and understand governance as a concept, and then extend that to multi-stakeholder governance, and then to internet governance, and then to finance and decentralized finance governance in successive layers. So if you're ready for me to do that, I'll go straight into my fundamentals. This is a little bit like if you've ever watched the great cellist Yo-Yo Ma. Before any performance, before any practice, he sits down and he plays the scales, the most fundamental beginner step. Every day. And this is like that. This is a fundamental. So I'm assuming it's okay to start with my slides?
Yes, please.
Great. So with luck, you're able to see currently on screen the first slide. I'm referring here to the 4 forces that affect blockchain or DLT governance, and I'll open up with some fundamentals, a bit of background on me, the outline. Let's start with this main point. And the main point here is that blockchains are collectives. So in order to understand a blockchain or a distributed ledger, you must first understand a collective. What is a collective? A collective is any group where all of the members agree to give the group certain powers. The power to reach less than unanimous decisions that nevertheless bind everybody. And those decisions would be on specific topics using various decision rules. Those rules can vary by topic, and to then compel us as individuals to honor the decisions, even the decisions we disagree with. And the third thing we empower the group to do is to change the decision rules, also by the same collective process. When these things are true, we have a collective. Please don't think you're just going to have voting. It is very naive. We see this a lot in the blockchain space, that people think, how hard can it be? I'll just put in a voting mechanism. You do not want to just use voting and think that you've solved your problems. If you just do voting, you will find situations where 2 wolves and 1 sheep are voting on what to have for dinner. And so the form looks fair, procedurally it's fair, but the outcome is not fair. And I promise you, if you set this up, the sheep will not join, at least not for long. So let's look at the decision space where collectives are appropriate. We have the a situation on the left column where getting to unanimous agreement is easy. In the right-hand column, unanimous agreement is hard. In the top row, having the group split up and make multiple different decisions and everyone does their own thing is okay. In the bottom row, it's not. So if it's easy to be unanimous and splitting up is okay, it doesn't matter what we do. If getting to unanimous is easy and it's not okay to split up, well, we just talk until we agree. Like 3 of us want to go to lunch together, we'll just talk until we agree where to go. Suppose unanimous agreement is hard, but it's still okay to split the group up. Well, we can have 20 people go to lunch and we'll all just go to a food court and there's 20 different food kiosks and everyone picks their own favorite food and we all sit together at a big table, but we each made individual choices in a market setting. But what if it's hard to become unanimous and it's not okay to split the group up? Now we're talking collective choices, things like national defense, things like interest rate policies, things like monetary supply or fraud exposure. Now we're talking about the kinds of problems where collective choices are necessary and we must treat the group as a collective. Next fundamental, now that we've defined collective, what is governance? Governance is the collective management of emergent issues. That is to say, governance means we have a collective or a collective choice. Management implies we are dealing with complexity. And emergent implies that the issue is not fully anticipated or not solved in advance or not subject to a policy or a protocol or a standard operating procedure. If we didn't have a collective, we would not be in governance. If we did not have to manage the problem, we wouldn't be in governance. And if we could anticipate it in advance through a stored procedure or a smart contract, again, not governance, it's just a piece of code. However, we definitely do have issues that must be solved collectively, that the answer cannot be anticipated in advance. So it's a system of making the collective decision and then carrying the decision out and then tweaking the decision-making rules. These 3 elements are present with governance. It looks a little bit like that. So for example, if 20 people decide to share 5 large pizzas with specific toppings and crust options, you might think, that's great. How long did it take to get to that agreement? Wonderful. And then someone says, well, it's great that we got agreement, but we're not done. And the policymakers say, well, of course we're done. We made an agreement. And those of us who actually implement things know that no, we're just getting started. We now have to put together the order. We have to place the order, pay for it, pick it up, serve it. Are there going to be plates? Do we need napkins? Is there anything to drink? And then if we want to amend the rules for deciding on future meals, that's also part of governance. When it comes to establishing a project, governance is different from technology. And I will make a point here, I will make a claim that the quality of governance is more important than the quality of your technology. Now you want both. Please don't, I'm not suggesting that weak technology is good. But if your governance system is insufficient, if people don't believe in it, if people lack faith in it, and you have weak technology, the entire exercise is pointless. However, if people believe, if governance is sufficient and people buy in and have faith, those stakeholders will come in and work with you and improve the technology. What we often see out in the wild is insufficient governance. This technology is strong, but as soon as you get past the point of proof of concept and you try to broaden your stakeholder base, stakeholders won't engage because technology is not enough for them. They need to see that their interests are protected. Only when the governance is sufficient and the technology is strong will your system scale. We often talk about whether governance should be on-chain or off-chain. You will often hear people talk about this. It is a false dichotomy. It's a false question. There is a spectrum from more automated on the left to less automated on the right. And so something like on-chain voting or collecting signatures to allow a vote to occur, easily put on-chain, not necessary, but you could. You could tally the votes and you could enforce voting periods. You could have voter registration and auto-executing code upgrades potentially. And people think of this as on-chain governance. But what about log rolling or side payments, deals to help people get to agreement? These may or may not be automatable. If you could have dispute resolution that's automated, great, but not all disputes can be automated. What about debating and campaigning? Now we're getting into territory that's very hard to automate. Making up your own mind, setting social norms, enforcing social norms. You get the idea. Some things are automatable and some are not. And yet all of this space, from the left to the right, top to the bottom, is the space where governance occurs. There are key governance challenges that exist that will apply in all contexts, including the principal agent problem, the difficulty of creating institutions if institutions do not yet exist. As I mentioned, setting social norms of conduct, enforcing social norms, voter apathy, rational ignorance. And if you have a public chain or public-facing chain, there's often an issue with lack of oracles that can be trusted for outside data, and a mix of expectations or a lack of an agreed purpose that prevent the stakeholders from reaching agreement on what to do. I want to mention now the four forces. This is from the new Chicago school model popularized by Lawrence Lessig in 1998. All human behavior on all technology platforms can be seen as facing four different forces or four classes of constraints: market forces, legal forces, social forces, and code. And I'll illustrate this by looking at Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, we have code that creates market incentives to secure the chain. Proof of work rewards honest miners and punishes dishonest miners. Double spending, it was made difficult. There is a little bit of legal enforcement from the outside in the sense of law enforcement will come chase after you if you steal enough Bitcoin from enough people or if you use Bitcoin in crimes, but it is off-chain. Bitcoin proper is simply code that creates market forces. There's no formal role for social forces inside of Bitcoin, although, of course, people still do engage in social conversations around how to steer the chain. So if we look at three issues across the four, you can see that miner/validator misbehavior faces no on-chain legal constraints whatever, nor any social constraints. However, proof of work has a market effect that honest mining is rewarded and that it's enforced with the code. What about deciding on upgrades? Well, there's the social aspect that people yell at each other on social media. And that's it. And by the way, the token price may plummet, may tank if you, say, fail to fix bug. And the code enforces that whatever the miners decide to do is what happens. And when it comes to theft, well, there's external law enforcement. You can contrast this with a system like VeChain. VeChain is a public chain aimed at business transactions that has a permissioned element. All of their validators have to pass KYC. Their validators sign a contract and have to purchase a set of tokens that they stake, and they're subject to lawsuits. They're exposed to the token price because they had to stake tokens to buy in. So if they harm the system, they're likely to lose their investment. And the code can prove who did what when on the chain. So there's an audit trail. It is governed by a council. The council could become corrupt. Well, the council members are subject to contract and lawsuit. There is a social contract that's established and written that people are asked to buy into, exposure to the token price, and there are biannual elections in the code to force turnover in the council. And upgrade decisions, there's a contract that states the rules, a legal contract that people signed. There's a white paper that sets out social expectations, and the code requires on-chain votes to make the upgrades happen. So you get the idea. I will jump forward to any chain you care to create, perhaps a collection of multiple chains for decentralized finance internationally. You'll have to deal with validator misbehavior issues. You'll have to know how to handle emergencies and how to decide on upgrades. And you've got a big open space here. How do you want to deploy legal forces? How do you want to deploy social forces? How do you want to apply market forces? And what code will you write? And that takes me to the end of the slideshow, and I hope a decent grounding in some fundamentals. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much for the great introduction. So, would you please show my slide? Yeah, thank you. So, back to... So, I want to ask two questions. The slide itself answered Thomas. My question to Thomas that what is the governance is expressed in the slide itself. So I will not ask Thomas about it, of course. Then let me ask to Takanashi-san on what is the governance in your point of view.
Yeah, I think I agree with Thomas' slide. So I think it's just saying the same thing in a different word. But my understanding of the governance is certain kind of the management mechanisms that are managing mechanism of the certain type of process that leads the group to achieve their goals. So in the context of the decentralized finance, the difficulty is how we can define the goals is very unclear. So everyone can have different ideas on their goals. And also how we can define the group is also difficult because in the decentralized system, anyone can join, anyone can leave, and anyone can create. So how we can define the group is also the difficult tasks. And of course, there's no formal mechanisms to manage this process. So that's why I think the blockchain-based system is very difficult to manage or kind of govern. So the governance is seemingly it's very simple, but for the decentralized system, it's very difficult to define and design. So I think the Thomas slide very helpful, especially on the four forces. So we can still understand what the factors that affect the governance or what factors that will affect our activities within the decentralized system. So how we can use these four mechanisms is very good framing of the question. So especially for the completely decentralized public type of blockchain, designing the mechanism to use these four factors is very difficult to agree on by everyone. Especially there is many different people with very different ideas on their goals, ideas on their purposes. So my question is how we can design these governance mechanisms. Thank you.
Okay, let me add a few words to the Takanashi-san's comment. The difficulty of so Thomas-san mentioned about the governance in each of the blockchain, like Bitcoin or VeChain, and it is, of course, it has its own difficulty, but the blockchains, I mean, decentralized finance, the governance difficulty is belong to its nature of the use it in a global space, not in an international space. So of course, it is. Thomas mentioned that it is inside the community of the developer or user of each of the chain. But when we are looking at where it will be used, the technology will be used in global manner. So let me touch a little bit about our research on on a study on internet multi-stakeholder governance. So prior to the appearance of the internet, of course, each of the country has their communication system inside. It has all of the governments have a different rule, of course, and that they have enforced some sort of regulated some of the rules to use a communication media inside each of the country. But internet breaks the border everywhere on the earth. So the difference is we could see the difference by the word difference of the word of the international, national, and global. Internet is a global system. It is not an international system. There is a distinct difference between these two. And then back to the discussion of the governance of the decentralized finance. We need to be looked at the global space. So when the internet started evolving in a business area, then it faced several issues, very difficult to solve, since we need to solve the issue in a global manner, not bound to the specific rules already available. So then we need to get together to solve the problem using some of the technique like ADR to address some of the issues which is related to the IPR, for example. So I think keep us in mind that the global is one of the important topic, important point of view to look at the problem, I think. So let me quickly show my set of slides. So after showing my slides, I'm going to ask again to panelists that the questions that what kind of decentralized finance agendas need to be resolved by governance or partially addressed by the multi-stakeholder governance. That is my question to two panelists. And let me show briefly visit our research, I mean the joint research between the KO and JFSA, which is a study on the governance for decentralized finance system using blockchain technology. So it is focusing to clarifying the multi-stakeholders governance usefulness in a decentralized area using a blockchain, using the multi-stakeholder governance which shaped the internet today. So there are three parts of the result described in the research. And the first part is the analysis of the multi-state governance on the internet. The second part is designing a multi-state governance for the decentralized finance system. So first part is analysis. Second part is our proposal. I mean, KO's proposal. So let me quickly review some of the interesting things. So looking at these words, what we found is that we need to consider diversity. We need to discuss in an inclusive and transparent manner, where the balance of the board to be balance of the influences per stake, ask the community, or the need to have an inclusive mechanism to continuously improve the organizational mechanism. When you look at these words, it looks like not so difficult, but actually the people or community discussed and did the multi-stakeholder governance style, multi-stakeholder style governance on, for example, domain name. Took nearly 20 years to achieve some level of the maturity. So each part is actually complexly related. So from the if you look at this statement, it looks easy, but actually implementing this is difficult. Yeah. So so this is what we found learned from the Internet Matter Stakeholder Governance. So the report is detailed what we found with the interviews. So please read the document. Unfortunately, at this moment, English version is not available, but will be available soon. So then we modeled how this could be done in a since there are two types. The governance on the domain name means that they have something to manage. So there is a resource direct stakeholders or resource in the indirect stakeholders. There's a distinction among them, and there is a resource to be governed. But in some of the decentralized finance systems, of course, we may not have such kind of resources need to be governed. So this is a skeleton model extracted from the current multi-stakeholder governance model, like ICANN. So we have a proposal to this proposal to applying this multi-stakeholder style governance to the decentralized finance. But let me skip this slide at this moment, and let us back to the question now. So, as an expert, would you please tell me what kind of the decentralized finance agendas need to be resolved by governance or possibly addressed by multi-stakeholder governance? You go first, or? Yeah.
So I can go first. So the decentralized finance is, for the regulator's perspective, is very new and very difficult creature to deal with, because in the past, in the centralized financial system, we can regulate financial institutions as an intermediary and also enforce regulation on them will enable us to achieve our regulatory goals, such as the financial stability or consumer protection or preventing financial crimes. So it's much simpler. So we can just establish regulation and enforce it. So, but in the case of the decentralized finance, by definition, there's no intermediaries. So we will lose the target to regulate. And also, the users can be anonymized. And so there's lots of very sophisticated anonymization technologies. So basically, it's not easy for us to regulate users directly. And of course, the technology itself is developed by the engineers all around the world as a global community. So all of these characteristics makes it very difficult for us to achieve our regulatory goals in the decentralized system. So that's why we need to consider the governance, because as Thomas mentioned, the legal and regulatory system is just one factor to influence the activities in the decentralized system. So we need to think about how we can use the market or the social norms or even the technology to bring some mechanisms to govern the system. So this is the background that the JFSA is considering the decentralized financial system needs a certain level of governance. So the most pressing issue is the privacy and anonymity and traceability issues, I think. So we already discussed in the panel session yesterday, I think. But recently, as you can imagine, there's lots of issues around, for example, the ransomware. So after the COVID-19 crisis, the the victims of the ransomware is dramatically increased. I think it's 150% before compared to before the COVID-19. So concerning the ransomware is not just the computer virus, but also the companies or individuals affected by ransomware pay the ransom. So they pay the ransom with the crypto asset, and then the criminals can get the crypto asset, kind of dirty crypto asset. They easily launder the money through the decentralized system, and then they can finance the activities. So that is the pressing issues. So I think the technology itself is not evil, but how people use the technology could be evil. So we need to think about how we can prevent this kind of the malicious activities within the society and the financial system. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, the financial regulators, with regulation alone, may not be able to eliminate these illicit activities. So that's why we need to talk with other stakeholders, including engineers, developers, as well as the academia, users, and the businesses as well, to eliminate the way to eliminate these malicious activities. So as Thomas, the 4 factors indicate that the market is most related to businesses. Of course, the regulation and legal system is related to the government or regulators. But of course, the technology or the code is mostly developed by the engineers and the developers, not by government. So we need to think about how we can engage the engineers or other stakeholders with our the other activities to make the society safe and sound. So I think the most pressing agenda for us is to think about how we can prevent the criminals to use this new decentralized system for the criminal purposes. That is my concern, and I hope even the most cypherpunk of the engineers don't want the criminals to use their technologies. So I think that we can find the middle ground or find the common goals to talk with or work with. So I hope we can cooperate with the other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good thought. So Thomas, please.
Yeah, one of the things that comes up for me when we have these conversations is who are the stakeholders? What is the purpose of the system? And how do the stakeholders balance their interests in pursuit of their shared agenda? When we have a collective purpose. And we all have to give up a little bit in order to achieve the shared outcome. I can't always have my own preferences. I have to give some up for you. You might have to give up some of your preferences to me so that we can have a shared result that's larger than what we could get by ourselves. What I'm seeing in finance is a group of stakeholders who mostly get to pass rules that they themselves don't have to live by. And I'm being a little overly broad. But regulators are essentially drafting financial institutions, large banks and small ones, into becoming a police force to try to prevent the use of the financial system to launder money, to allow bribes to be paid, human trafficking, drug trafficking, financing of terrorism, other things that are, I think we could most of us would mostly agree that that's mostly bad. And in the process, 2 side effects have occurred. The people with the least voice pay the heaviest price. It's not the criminals who are most inconvenienced, but individuals who maybe have their bank account closed because the bank just doesn't understand their business and feels they're too risky. or they don't, maybe they're a refugee, maybe they're crossing borders, maybe they're economically disadvantaged. I've been informed by people who I believe know this, I don't personally know it, that a good set of counterfeit credentials, good enough to pass bank KYC, will cost a criminal about $1,000 in US funds. And a poor person, a refugee, an unbanked person, a person living on the edge of poverty, absolutely can't afford that. They can't even afford regular credentials that cost a lot less. But for a powerful criminal, that's a trivial impediment. The obvious, one obvious direction to head in, but of course, bankers don't dare say this, would be to reduce the scope of black market activities so that the scope of black market finance would go down. I'll give you one example is the price of heroin on the streets of Portugal. You can't buy heroin very easily on the streets of Portugal because Portugal has decriminalized the use of drugs, and people who are hardcore addicts are mostly getting their needs met through clinics. There's very little in the way of black market finance for drugs in Portugal. And it's not because we've cracked down on the banks or taken away everybody's privacy financially. It is going to have to be a combination, I believe, of several things that will get us where we say we want to go. One of which is a reduction in the black market itself by decriminalizing and taxing many of the activities that are currently black market activities. It is unsurprising that terrorists turn to black market drugs and human trafficking to finance their terrorist activities, because it's a big moneymaker, and black markets are naturally controlled by the most violent people around. There's very little that a bank can do to stop that. And again, if I have enough money to throw at the problem, if one bank shuts me down, I'll get more counterfeit credentials and open a new account elsewhere. There's a limit to what the financial system can do to prevent willing buyers and willing sellers of things like drugs and prostitution from conducting their activities somehow. Mostly it's cash, of course. What are we going to do in the future then? We absolutely have to find ways to control the misuse of the financial system for illegal activities. We have to find ways to do international clearing. We have to find ways for different countries to harmonize their systems. And at the same time, I suspect we're going to have to face the limits of what society can ask a financial system to do for society. You can no more invent a hammer that nobody can use to hit somebody over the head with than you can invent a currency that somebody somewhere can't use in a fraudulent transaction. And to ask the financial system to do that is, at some level, we will run out of how much result we can get for the discomfort and pain we cause people. And right now, most of the pain is being felt by people with the least power. And that, to me, is, I think, fundamentally wrong. Whether that gets onto the nation's agendas, I don't know. So what will decentralized finance have to do? Number one, it must decide what its purpose is. Number two, it must decide what its scope is, what is and is not in bounds to be worked on. And then three, we must decide how we, as a bunch of international actors, are willing to let go of our own subjective national power in order to harmonize with the international or global order. We can no more have a United States or a Japan or a Korean or Fiji version of the internet or version of the TCP/IP protocol. Then we'll be able to have our own private financial system in the future. The harmonization is coming, and it's a matter of how much we have to give up and what we won't what we won't ask the financial system do for us? These are hard questions, and they transcend what bankers can do.
Yeah, interesting. And it is really hard problem to, firstly, to understand, and secondly, how we can address this. And honestly, I have difficulty to understand how, for example, the regulators approach to these ideas. Do you have any thought on how you can approach? So I mean, you mentioned about the engineers. You need skill or power of engineers to help improve the situation. So they will. We want them to come closer. How you can? The regulators can come closer to have discussion like this difficult thing.
Yes, so I think the Thomas comment is very important because we need to think whole new system type, very new ideas. We need to accept the new ideas. So as Thomas mentioned, we can probably think about what the financial system can do for the society. That is very fundamental question. But usually the regulators or even the people in the financial system don't think about these very fundamental questions in the day-to-day business. So, but when we deal with issues like this, like the decentralized financial system, it's very new, and this new system will force us to think more fundamental questions, as a day-to-day business. So what the financial system can do for the society is one of them, and of course what is the role of the regulation is also the one of them. So I think in the decentralized, so I think the internet completely changed the landscape of the communication and the regulation in the communication system. So I think the financial regulators is facing the similar type of transformative situation as the telecom regulators faced when the internet emerges. So to answer this, the Shigeya-san question, regulators themselves think become open to new ideas, new mechanisms, and also to talk very honestly with the other stakeholders what we are concerning, what is the issues we are facing, and ask them to give us the ideas, their capabilities, or help us to solve these issues. So that is very uncomfortable for regulators, to be honest. So for the financial regulators, so far we can do basically anything we want to do because we can establish regulation, we can enforce this regulation on the banks or insurance companies or security broker dealers. It's much simpler. So once we agree on the regulation among regulators, then we can just implement. That is, of course, this process is not easy, but still it's much simpler. But in the decentralized system, the things become much more complicated. So we need to first acknowledge that it's become complicated, and our ability to achieve our regulatory goals will be somehow eroded in the decentralized system. That is a reality. So we need to acknowledge these realities, and then actively seeking ideas from the outside of our regulatory community, like engineers or businesses. So the idea is this kind of the conversation is very important. to understand what other people in other areas thinks about the issues, and this will enable us to expand the scope of our considerations and our approaches. So of course, as a regulator, we need to communicate our concerns to the engineers is also important. So maybe the engineers don't care about regulation, don't care about regulatory concerns. So we need to communicate with them to let them know what we are thinking and what we are asking for. And then of course not every engineers, but some of them may help us to expand our knowledge and approaches by using technology. So this kind of interaction is very important. We need to understand engineers, and we need to understand what the other stakeholders think, and also we need to let them know what we are thinking, and then understand each other to find, as Thomas mentioned, define the shared goal is very difficult, but ultimately we need to have some shared goals, shared purposes and establish some process to achieve these shared purposes. I think that is a governance. So that's why I think the multi-stakeholder governance is very important. We need to understand each other, and the regulation alone will not be enough. Then we need to expand our scope into other three forces, so mechanisms, market, norms, and code architecture. So then we need to ask other stakeholders to help us to using these new different forces into the society. So I think the first thing is to understand each other, and then the second thing is to establish shared goals, and the third thing is to establish some formal mechanisms or formal process to achieve these shared goals with various stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Thomas, do you have anything you want to add to Yuta-san's comment?
I would be very alert to and concerned about the plans that we read coming from the Chinese central bank for a digital yuan that would allow for transaction by transaction surveillance by the Chinese Communist Party, by the central government, over the individual transactions of every individual in a nation or around the world, anyone using that currency. And as central banks around the world look at their own digital currencies, they're going to have to decide, do they want to have surveillance currencies? Do they want to have privacy currencies? Or do they want to do something in between? And to the extent we have a global system, how do those global systems interact? We may have a very fundamental rethink ahead of us about what we want from our monetary system as human beings. And what does our society wish to tolerate in terms of privacy intrusion? What do we wish to tolerate in terms of law enforcement intrusion? What do we wish to tolerate in terms of criminal activity? And what we need to perhaps bring in from the black market into a more regulated regime. These are difficult, fundamental questions, and I believe every society on the planet will face them with increasing pressure in the next few years.
Thank you very much.
I should add that I'm glad I'm not a regulator, because that is a very tough job.
Yeah, really is. One thought that came to my mind is, of course, I'm a researcher on internet, so I'm try to always I compare with what happened in the internet, and I think the why internet succeed in we observe nowadays is it belong to its simplicity of the design. So that is a part of about the reason why the internet is so successfully developed and evolved. And by looking at that fact, I'm really nervous about whether we can do similar improvement on decentralized finance, since the decentralized finance is a really complex system. And one of the things we need to do is maybe, we need to have a conversation, of course, as you guys stated, and we need to stand at the common ground. And possibly that is not only the regulators, but also engineers. And we know that the engineers and the regulators speaks different language. So we need to adjust that. And long beyond that point, we need to find a way to design how the decentralized finance for which is useful and also easy to regulate in terms of the preventing the criminal activities, for example. That is it is really huge. It looks like a huge challenge for me. And of course, it is worth to do, I think, but it is difficult. So I really want to people to join the discussion, since it is important. And what we are doing now will define our future, I think, to make the whether the usefulness, whether we can expand the usefulness of the global internet by using decentralized finance or not. It depends on that, I think. And there are many borders. Actually, internet itself is a global system, but nowadays we have a lot of the borders between the services. And to remove such kind of the borders, we need some sort of the global agreement to use decentralized finance technology. I think not necessarily to be specific technology, but how we want to use it or regulate it might be the agenda of what we need to talk about. So we only have less than 3 minutes. So would you please give us final words, boss of the panelists? So Yuta-san, please.
Yeah, so I think the discussion is still very early stage, and also the issue is very difficult and very large, but still the technology itself is very early stage, and also the regulation and the governance discussion is still very early stage. So the JFSA have just joined the Global Governance Initiative Network. The Global Blockchain Global Governance Initiative Network begin. It's just started, and we are one of the members of this initiatives. So I think the begin is very early stage, and it's still very seeking the participants from the various stakeholders. But I think this kind of the efforts is very important to as Shigeru-san mentioned, there is no common language at this moment, but talking with different stakeholders will enable us to understand what they are talking eventually, and also help us to understand what other parties think. So there is a place to foster the cooperation. So I think it's very good developments, and also I'm very much looking forward to contributing this kind of activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thomas-san, please.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that governance is a topic that everyone's going to have to look into more and more deeply in coming years. The IEEE, ISO, and INATBA, several other organizations working globally are engaged in governance activities. I chair a group called P2145 that's involved in this, and I follow the other ones very closely. You made an excellent point earlier about the simplicity of internet protocols. I would add that modularity is also a key design feature of the internet protocols, the 7-layer ISO model. TCP is distinct from IP. IP is distinct from Layer 2 Ethernet and Token Ring. transport protocols. And this sense of modularity, simplicity, and fractal design, the ability of things to scale up from small structures to large structures, is going to give us adaptability, flexibility that we are going to absolutely need. And I would close by suggesting that the grassroots phenomenon of the chamas of Africa are perhaps an ideal building block for a future financial regime that would combine identity, fraud resistance, privacy protection, and grassroots organizing. So that's one of the areas that I find the most hope when I look out there. And I want to say I've learned a great deal from the extremely impressive work that I've seen in the deck that was presented on Internet protocols, and I'm very grateful to have been invited. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we already passed the time. So thank you very much to come, and also thank you very much for the two of the panelists come together to discuss this thing. So we are looking forward to have all of you to join the conversation in the governance of the decentralized finance. Thank you very much.
どうもありがとうございました。ご登壇の皆様に今一度大きな拍手をお願いいたします。ありがとうございました。